So, good evening, everyone. Tonight is a deeply symbolic moment for my family and me. My parents are here in the room. I flew them to New York from respectively Sierra Leone and Lebanon because I wanted them to be here for this moment. They're actually over there. Not only to hear me speak, but to see what their sacrifices became. For many years, they took care of me, and tonight, even in some small way, I get to take care of them. My name is Rene Sultan. I'm a former life scholar, and 1 year ago, I graduated from Columbia University. That sentence is simple, but for my family, it was not obvious. In fact, it almost never happened. I was born and raised in Beirut as the only child of parents whose dreams were marked by the Lebanese Civil War. Like many Lebanese parents of their generation, they wanted for me what history had taken from them: education, opportunity, and the freedom to build a life without constantly starting over. My father, my role model, lost his mother when he was 13 and his father when he was 20. His dream was to become a pilot, but when he was 17, while crossing what we call the Green Line in Beirut, he was shot in the head. He survived miraculously, but he lost proper function in one eye, and with it, the dream he carried as a boy. At 21, with both parents gone and his dream broken, he left Beirut for Sierra Leone alone to build a life from scratch, and he did. My mother, the backbone of our family, carried her own sacrifices too. She did not complete college because she had to provide for her parents and younger siblings. Yet, she built a 40-year career in banking without a degree. I was lucky. My parents protected me from the weight of all of that. They gave me everything that had been taken away from them. They raised me to believe that education was not a path forward, but it was a form of dignity. And that is how the story was supposed to continue. Despite the financial difficulties they faced over the years, my parents had put aside enough money for my university education. They wanted me to have the chance they never fully had. But then 2020 happened. COVID severely affected my father's business. During the same period, his house and warehouses in Sierra Leone were broken into and set on fire. It was the kind of work and shock that can undo decades of work. At the same time in Lebanon, the financial crisis erased what my parents had saved for my education. The money was technically there, but for like a lot of other families, it was no longer truly ours. It was December. I already applied to Columbia, but my mother told me that I should withdraw my application because we could no longer afford it. And a week later, I get in. I had received the news I had dreamed of, but we could not celebrate because in our minds it was already impossible. But I refused to accept that this would be my fate too. I refused to let another Lebanese crisis take from me what war had already taken away from my parents. I did not know how, but I decided that rather than feeling sorry for myself, I was going to find a way. So I started calling and messaging everyone I could think of about scholarships for Lebanese students. And shortly after, I was connected to Life. A few weeks later, and I received a $12,000 scholarship program. It was a beautiful first step, but there was still a major gap before we could afford Columbia. And then something extraordinary happened. People from Life worked to raise additional support from donors. And in 2 months, Life was able to raise close and more than $200,000 for my education. from people who did not know me, whom I did not know, and some of whom I still have not met. I had been carrying a lot of this quietly because I did not want to give my parents false hope. But when the funding finally came together and went back to them and told them, we have enough, I can go to Colombia. They could not believe it, and I think it's the first time I've seen my dad crying his whole life. And to be completely honest with you, we still see it as a miracle. I don't think we have fully processed what happened then, even to this day. A few months later, my father and I were on a plane to the US for the first time for both of us, heading to New York to begin a new chapter on Columbia's campus. When I arrived in New York, I had no family in the US whatsoever, and life gave me a community. I met Lebanese professionals who supported me, guided me, and opened doors for me. Looking back, it still feels surreal. I was a kid from Beirut who grew up planning his day around electricity cuts and neighborhood generators. And a few years later, I was studying computer science at Columbia, working in machine learning at Spotify, and as Habib and Karim were talking about earlier, took a bet on myself my last year at Columbia, started a startup from my college dorm through Y Combinator, and raised more than $3 million with support of mentors I had met through life. And again, it's a risk worth taking. 1.5 years later, it did not work out, but as Karim was saying, I went to ramp, and I just got my H-1B a month before. I say this not as a list of achievements, but because none of it was even remotely imaginable from my bedroom in Lebanon. Somehow, life was there at every step of the way, the good, the bad, and the uncertain. And that is why I wanted my parents here tonight, because this is not just a nice story about a student who received a scholarship. It is the closing of a circle. My parents gave everything so I could have a future. Today, they get to see what that future is becoming. Thank you.